Here we are. Check. All right. It's Lit Book Reviews. I'm here with my good friend Daniel Day-Lewis. I am Gary Oldman, and welcome back to It's Lit Book Reviews, the podcast about books. We are going to do our top 10 overall books. No genres, no stipulations. Top 10 books that we've ever read. It is July 17th of 2023, so approximately mid 2023. This list is subject to change, although I got some killers on my list, so it's going to be difficult. So yeah, we're going to go through our list. We're going to go mention some honorable mentions, and then we're going to go 10 to 1. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to try to get through it in like an efficient manner, but these are our favorite books, so we may drone on, but
and we also, like, if there's a series we like, we're not including multiple books from a series. I just picked my favorite book from that series.
Yeah, I did the same thing. We didn't even talk about that, but I didn't pick anything. I didn't use the same author twice, and I didn't do any more than one from a series, which would kind of fall under not using an author twice, actually. So I just didn't use any authors twice. I did have one in the honorable mentions that is in the top 10. But anyway, anything else you want to say before we jump into it?
No.
All right, so I'll start off. I have 6 honorable mentions. You have 4. So my honorable mentions, I don't know why I just got these off the bookshelf, dude. I'm not picking up every one of these books.
I mean, I'll just put a picture up beside.
Okay.
It'll go right here.
So my honorable mentions, and these are not in particular order, but Washington, A Life by Ron Chernow on George Washington. Absolute banger of a book. Chernow is one of the greatest authors, one of the best modern historians. I don't know if he's still alive, but anyway, not going to spend a long time on the honorable mentions, but if you want to read about Washington, this is the book to read. It's so freaking good. Obviously, we're not going to get into all the... I just need to preface this in general. I need to say this in another video, in like our description video. Liking or enjoying reading about a person does not mean you think that person is just a completely good person. And some people nowadays struggle to rectify that. Like, I've had people look at me a certain way for reading about American presidents, and it's like, I'm not saying I think everything they did was good, but it's history. Nothing in history is all good. No person is all good. Washington by Ron Chernow. Next is Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff. Very good. Very entertaining read. It reads like a novel.
Yeah. I almost read that one.
It's super good. Obviously, with anything in that era, like, a lot of it's a little conjecture-y, like a lot of it's interpretations over thousands of years. So it was really good, though, for what it was. Next up, The War That Ended Peace by Margaret Macmillan. This is about the lead up to World War I. This was almost in the top 10. I read this last year. Yeah, last year. Freaking amazing. You need to read it. Anybody, honestly, it doesn't matter what you like. This is an important book because, especially nowadays, it just kind of puts stuff in perspective as how we end up getting in situations that we're in the world. The Last Train from Hiroshima by Charles Pellegrind. This is just about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are stories from people that were on the ground when the atomic bombs were dropped at the end of World War II. And it is super fascinating, regardless of what you believe or think of that time and that event. It is a crazy read. It's almost like science fiction. Next up, The First Wave by Alex Kershaw. This is about D-Day and some of the first groups, squads, men that went in and stormed the beaches or did different things. This is... in a lot of ways, these are people that went in behind enemy lines to prepare for the actual advance of D-Day, so that when these guys got through the beaches, they weren't meeting impossible odds and didn't have guns in certain places, whatever, all that kind of stuff. It's really good. And then last from our honorable mentions is A. Lincoln, obviously about Abraham Lincoln, by Ronald C. White, who is, again, in my top 10. He's actually my number 1. But this one about Lincoln is really, really good. It's my favorite book on Lincoln that I've read so far, although I have not read John Meacham's most recent one, which I hear is amazing, but really, really good. Ronald C. White is also a god. Both Rons are some Ron gods. And those are my honorable mentions. Tried to make it quick, but I didn't. What are yours?
All nonfiction.
All the honorable mentions are nonfiction.
Every single one of them. All right, so I have 4. The first one I have is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Which is not fantasy, just normal fiction. I would say mystery, crime, thriller. But I've actually never seen the movie either.
I've seen parts of it. I haven't seen all of it.
I'm not sure. Someone say in the comments here. I don't know if it really follows the book. I'm not sure. I have a feeling it doesn't. because it's like 6 books, and I have the first 3. But I think it's 6 books. The author died, I know, and so he didn't actually get to finish it, and someone else finished it. And I've heard like the author that picked up, it's just not as good. But anyway, it's got 3 million ratings.
What?
On Goodreads.
I didn't pull up any of mine on Goodreads.
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious to see. But anyway, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, it was solid. I like it. I haven't read any of the other ones yet. I will. It's just I have so many other things to read. But it was actually really good. Kind of dark, which, I mean, I like that type of stuff. A book that we just reviewed, or I just reviewed the other day, Best Served Cold, by Joe Abercrombie, is also an honorable mention. It's a good standalone. It's fantasy. We already have a video on it if you want to go hear more about that. Another one this is nonfiction, and this book's kind of for anyone, not just like a history buff, but it's called American Kingpin, The Epic Hunt for the Criminal Mastermind Behind the Silk Road. So it's about this guy who, and the way it's written is really cool, but anyway, it's about this guy who had something called the Silk Road, which is just a way he was distributing drugs on the dark web. And like he was the first one to do that
Interesting.
in the early 2000s. But anyway, it's how he gets caught. But really fascinating book, and especially the way the guy writes it. He's a journalist, the guy who writes it, Nick Bilton. But this was actually a recommendation from Caroline. It was one of her top books a couple years ago. It's actually her copy. And Caroline, if you're watching
Shout out Caroline.
I want Jade War back. Because
I
gave her Jade War. No, the second one. In swap for this, and also congratulations on just getting engaged.
Oh,
Caroline just got engaged.
Oh, congrats, Caroline!
Right. But anyway,
super hype.
Great book. And then the 4th one I have is Warbreaker, which I actually read that on my Kindle.
Dude, be very careful touching these freaking cords, dude. If this thing goes off again, I swear.
We're not doing the podcast anymore.
Warbreaker, top 10 or honorable mention.
Honorable, yeah.
Wow.
I had an honorable mention.
I kind of feel bad for not putting it on there now. I didn't even think of Warbreaker.
Yeah, I almost didn't, and I was thinking about it, and I think after we did our thing, I actually appreciated it more. I don't know. I feel like really I lost some.
I feel like that's gonna happen a lot, actually.
Yeah.
With books, we're gonna like read.
You helped me appreciate like some things I didn't really think about. But anyway, so those are my honorable mentions.
Sweet. All right, let me say one thing before we get into top 10. I'm just gonna say this really quickly. I'm not saying it because I'm anticipating any kind of roast over it. But Lord of the Rings is not on this list for me at all. I didn't put it anywhere. It's amazing. No, I've read it. It was a long time ago, though. I have not reread Lord of the Rings since I started really reading, which was February of 2020.
He's not a real reader.
So, and that's when I really started reading heavily, all that stuff. I read Lord of the Rings in high school. I can't put it on here. I remember it being amazing. I know it's foundational. I know it's probably better than every book in the world, whatever. And I do love it. I do think it's amazing. I did reread The Hobbit recently, but anyway, I just want to put that out there. It's not on here.
Hey, that's fine. We get it. You don't really like fantasy. It's fine.
That's not true.
I'm kidding. All right, you want me to go first?
Go.
So I'm gonna read what it is, and I'm gonna say what the ratings are on Goodreads and all that, and then I'll even read like the little synopsis. You cool with that? And then like I'll just say like what I think about it. All right. So my number 10 is actually a nonfiction book.
Oh, nice.
And it's Nicholas and Alexandria. The classic account of the fall of the Romanov dynasty. I mean, this is what got me into Russian history. Great book. It's by Robert Massey. Anyway, super great book. It's 4.2 rating on Goodreads. It only has 28,000 ratings, but still. But it says, in this commanding book, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Robert K. Massey sweeps readers back into the extraordinary world of Imperial Russia to tell the story of the Romanovs' lives. Nicholas's political naivety, Alexander's obsession with the corrupt mystic Rasputin, and little Alexei's brave struggle with hemophilia against a lavish backdrop of luxury and intrigue. Massey unfolds a powerful drama of passion and history, the story of a doomed empire and the death-marked royals who watched it crumble. So, again, this is about the fall of the Romanov dynasty, which, was the royal family in Russia. So this is, the switch from a monarchy to then, what ends up becoming communism, or the founding of communism in Russia. But
and that all takes place in World War One.
Yeah, it gives you some stuff before World War One,
sure,
and then a build up to World War One. The whole stuff with Rasputin is so cool. It gives you a little more like stuff about what's going on in Europe too, just because Alexandria is not Russian. And then also Nicholas, has some relatives that are some pretty important people in Russia too. But anyway, this is what got me to where I have like a whole top shelf of just Russian history. I just stabbed myself in the eye.
Nice.
But anyway, great book. Robert Massey's style is just really smooth, which I'm sure you can account to more just because you've read more nonfiction. But this was one of the first nonfiction books I read, and it was like, oh, this doesn't feel like a textbook. And so, nice. But then also it was just kind of so fascinating for me. But anyway, that's my 10. Oh, and it's the third book in a 4-part series. So this is a series called The Romanovs, and this is the third book. So the first book is, just for anyone who's curious, is called Peter the Great, His Life and World. The second one is the Catherine the Great book I have, Portrait of a Woman. Third one is the one we just said, and then the fourth one is The Romanovs, the final chapter. But anyway.
Very nice.
Number 10.
All right, sweet. Number 10 for me is Citizen Soldiers, Stephen Ambrose. The U.S. Army from the Normandy beaches to the Bulge to the surrender of Germany. Stephen Ambrose, if you've read history, you probably know that name. He's written things like Band of Brothers, which I'm sure many of you have seen. He's written
know that.
Yeah, Crazy Horse and Custer, which is a book that almost made it. It only didn't because I already used the author. But so yeah, this is about World War II. It's very heavily, Ambrose does this a lot. He has got several books books on World War II, and just in general, he's very in this. If it were fantasy, like we always talk about, he's very character driven. So he's very people driven. You get to know some of these guys that live and die in World War II. And then obviously you get like the specific movements and different things they did throughout the war. In this book in particular, you read about, guys that, died pretty quickly in the war, guys that make it a certain way, almost make it out, guys that make it through the whole thing. And it's very, very impactful. Obviously anything from World War II is. And Ambrose is like an OG as far as historians. Obviously, that's why you have things like Band of Brothers. They don't do that for any,
What are the stats on that book again?
Yeah. So on Goodreads, we've got 22,000 ratings and a 4.23 overall out of 5. I obviously gave it a 5. But yeah, this is a super fan. If you want to get into World War II as far as the American perspective, and you want to read about some of these soldiers, learn about what they did, learn about the hardships, regardless of what you think of war. It did happen. So very good. Citizen Soldiers, Stephen Ambrose. That's my number 10.
Nice. All right, so moving on to number 9 for both of us. So my number 9 is back to fantasy, which will remain for the entirety of this list. And it is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. So
nice.
This is a book that I read last year, and I love a good vampire story, and there's just not like a lot of good vampire stories that are done well. Man, I was very hesitant at first going into this, but it was so good. So good. But anyway, it's got 4.37 rating out of 5 on Goodreads, 34,000 ratings, but I'll read the little synopsis here. So it says, it has been 27 long years since the last sunrise. For nearly 3 decades, vampires have waged war against humanity, building their eternal empire even as they tear down our own. Now only a few tiny sparks of light endure in a sea of darkness. Gabrielle de Leon is a silver saint, a member of a holy brotherhood dedicated to defending realm and church from the creatures of the night. But even the silver order could not stem the tide once daylight failed us, and now only Gabriel remains. Imprisoned by the very monsters he vowed to destroy, the last Silver Saint is forced to tell his story, a story of legendary battles and forbidden love, of faith lost, friendships won, of the wars of the blood and the Forever King, and the quest for humanity's last remaining hope, the Holy Grail. So, long kind of thing there. But anyway, I to preface this, I hate first person, reading first person fantasy. And this one is very interesting because it's normally written in a way I would not like. So, like it says, the main character, Gabriel de Leon, he has already been captured. So he's retelling his story. And so it's almost like, you already know that he's going to survive, but it's written so well that it doesn't matter. So it's technically not written in first person, but because he's telling his story, it is. Yeah. So it's a third person with the third person telling his story in first person. But anyway, really good. It's really dark, and that's probably why I like it, very grim dark. The characters are really cool. But anyway, it's just a cool world that he paints, and just like we talked about earlier, like in Warbreaker, there's this talking sword in this that is so cool. The sword he has is a talking sword. So,
Love a good
anyway,
talking sword.
dude. Yeah, I don't know what about it. It's just so cool. It's just a companion that adds like depth. But
Is this a series or just a one-off?
so apparently it says Empire of the Vampire #1.
But
So
it's
I mean,
only,
this just came
okay.
out. Came out in 2021, September of last year, or well, 2 years ago.
Homeboys do. Sounds like
Yeah,
book 2 needs to
it's a
come
pretty
out
big book,
soon.
but it's definitely worth reading.
Nice.
Number 9.
All right, number 9 for me, A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill
wow,
Bryson.
Okay.
I love this book, and you said something earlier when we were talking about our list that kind of made me put this on my list. You said, like, I forgot how you said it now, but you were like, I put my top 10 on this list based upon how, like, my experience was reading or how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And dude, this book was just so fun to read. It's
Yeah.
so the description is Bill Bryson describes himself as a reluctant traveler, but even when he stays safely at home, he can't contain his curiosity about the world around him. A Short History of Nearly Everything is a quest to understand everything that has happened from the Big Bang to the rise of civilization, how we got from there being nothing at all to here being us. The ultimate eye-opening journey through time and space, revealing the world in a way most of us have never seen it before. And so this was like, and regardless of like your beliefs or politics, like there's certainly going to be things in this book that some people are like, oh, is that really what happened or is that true?
Yeah.
But it is fascinating. Some of it's inarguable. Some of it he's just making like, he just puts stuff into perspective. And I wish I had gotten like more quotes, but again, we're trying to be efficient. But it's a lot of science stuff, but it's like, in my opinion, brought down to like the most layman's terms possible so that anybody can read it and not fully understand necessarily. You can't walk into a lab and start doing something, but you can conceptualize everything he's saying because he explains it so well. So like it said, essentially you're starting from the beginning of time and getting here, but it's not really a history of humanity. It is a history of science more so and discovery, if you will, I think. So there's just stuff about everything from, tectonic plates to the moon.
Yeah.
There's just all kinds of stuff in this book, and we have 2 copies of it in here.
I actually never finished it.
Really?
Yeah.
So
It's one of the few books I've DNF'd. But I also started that, I don't want to say early into my starting to read again phase, but it's just, I was reading so much fantasy, man. And you know how it is. Like, I'm just such a fantasy guy, and like, I have to get kind of in a nonfiction mood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I started it trying to like force myself into a nonfiction mood because I remember I got like halfway through it, and I was fascinated with it, but I think I was reading something else at the time.
Yeah.
And it took a back seat, and then I just never came back to it. I mean, like right now, dude, that A Killer in the Kremlin.
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading that for 4 months. If we're being technical about it.
Yeah.
So
like,
I'll just have to restart eventually.
Yeah, I mean, it's super good, super worth it, but yeah, I definitely understand that. You've been on that hardcore fantasy vibe, so.
I like how it's an encompassing, like, just, it's almost a little bit about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of know, at least from what I was gathering about it, it's not like diving super deep into one topic.
For sure.
But it's diving, like, pretty to where you're at least going to know about something for so many things.
Yeah. So, like, if you're interested in reading this, if you have any interest in getting like a general idea of what the science essentially is and what the understanding again of discovery and things that we know to this point and like theories about what could happen based upon what we know or what is based upon what we know, it's anything from like a broken down explanation about some like chemical and how it reacts to something to him explaining a visual image of what would happen if a meteor the size of Texas hit Earth.
Yeah.
Like in a way that is fascinating. It's like you're reading about it's like you're in an IMAX movie theater watching something insane happen that you've never seen play out before in front of your eyes. So it's a really good read if you're interested in that nearly at all. I did recommend this to one other person who, and he's not, he doesn't like read a ton every day like you and I do necessarily. He's a reader, but takes it a little slower, and he read it for like a year and just like was like
really soaked it in.
Like he liked it, but it was not an engaging read for him as it was for me. So I can understand, especially if you're reading other stuff, I can understand losing interest.
I can see it being a book though where you don't have to read cover to cover. You could like open it up and find like a part that's fascinating and just read that part if that makes sense too. So
yeah, you definitely could. So yeah, as far as I gotta pull up its stats right back up. You just wait 1 second because I didn't say them, did I?
I don't think you said them now.
So it has got, I think it was 300,000 or something like that. It's got 370,000
So
ratings.
it's got a lot of ratings.
Yeah, and it's got a 4.2. So came out in 2004. But yeah,
Nice.
that's my number 9.
All right. So my number 8 is a book that is on your list, I'm sure.
Okay.
It is Dune by Frank Herbert.
Okay.
So Dune has 1.2 million ratings. 4.26 rating out of 5. I wonder how many of those ratings have come since the first Dune movie. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if there was, like, if we could see a graph on how many ratings there were.
I bet Goodreads doesn't
before
even know
2
because
years.
nobody
Yeah.
works for that app. They don't have a single
No.
developer.
No one. I don't even know if I should read the, well, it's a short, so I'll read it anyway. It says, set on the desert planet Arrakis, Dune is the story of a boy, Paul Atreides, heir to a noble family tasked with ruling an inhospitable world where the only thing of value is the spice melange. Is that how you always said it?
I said melange.
Melange. A drug capable of extending life and enhancing consciousness. Coveted across the known universe, melange is a prize worth killing for. When House Atreides is betrayed, the destruction of Paul's family will set the boy on a journey toward a destiny greater than he could have imagined, as he evolves into the mysterious man known as Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib, whatever. He will bring to fruition humankind's most ancient and obtainable dream. So, number 8 for me, obviously a great book. This book's like 800 pages. I read this book in a day.
It wasn't a day. It was 2 or 3 for me. I mean, I burned.
So I
through
did. I
that
mean, I
thick
woke
boy.
up early, and it was all I did for an entire day. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I finished it like super late. So I mean, I'm not a fast reader. It was just that's how much time I spent in it. Because I remember I just couldn't put it down. It was honestly one of the first books that got me back into reading too. I remember it might have been one of the first books I ever rated on Goodreads. Honestly.
Yeah.
Um,
It was early on. It was 2020 when I read
and
it.
I just remember. I mean, I know we could spend an hour talking about just Dune itself, like just the first book.
Yeah.
But I just remember the world feeling so expansive. Like, it just felt so big. He did such a good job, Frank Herbert, that is, in painting a world that just seemed massive, but yet real at the same time.
Yeah.
And not just, like, he just does it, like, I don't know. Sometimes people, like, try and paint something big and they don't do a good enough job, so it just doesn't, it feels, like, really flimsy. Like, his is just so believable. So, like, when you hear about Paul... Cut that. Anyway... Great book.
No spoilers.
No spoilers in this one. But anyway,
The thing I wanted to say was spoilery too. I had to
Yeah.
stop myself.
So anyway, great book. It's huge. I mean, it reminds me of an epic fantasy, but in that sci-fi way where, I mean, Jesse and I've talked about this a lot, but there's a lot of action, but there's also a lot of the like, hey, I'm one step ahead of you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it's just like that mental game, which is so different than like other types of action, but like just as rewarding to read, if not more rewarding when it's really well done, just because it's like, oh, it's so well thought out.
And he continues to do that.
Yeah, so I've only read the first 3. Jesse's read them all, but I'm reading God. Well, I'll start it probably tonight. I got to crack that open so we can talk about it. But anyway, Dune is my number 8.
Yeah, great book. You're right. It is on my list. I'll get to it when we get to it, and it'll be quick. So I'll just say now that, yeah, it's an amazing book. It definitely was early on for me. It almost is a dagger sometimes.
When did you read it? Like recently?
No, 2020. I just finished
We
the whole
might have
series
read it around
recently.
the same time.
Probably, because yeah, it was early on because I just knew of it and
Yeah.
picked it up. Jake had recommended it a lot as well.
Dude, crazy stat here. Sorry to interrupt you. It won the Hugo Award for Best Novel, 1966. So, something to think about.
That's crazy. That's insane. Yeah, it's in my list as well. It's a little higher than yours, but I think it's my next one actually. But the 6th book, Heretics of Dune, is my second favorite in the series and is one of my favorite sci-fi books.
Number
of all time.
6.
Number 6, Heretics of Dune.
So
It
after
is-
God Emperor.
No. I'm sorry. Number 5, Heretics. I'm sorry. There's 6 total. I'm sorry. The 5th one, Heretics of Dune,
Okay, yeah.
is my second favorite in the series. Messiah is a close second. Messiah is so good. But anyway, I say that to say the whole series is really good, and obviously the movies are out as we're recording this, so the first one is, the second one's coming soon. So we don't want to spoil anything if you haven't read, but they are well worth the read. Even if Denis ends up making 15 movies and you watch all of them before you read them, they're worth the read because there is so much more in the book. So anyway, that's your number 8.
Yeah, 8.
Okay, so number 8 for me, I I don't know if you've read this or not. I can't remember, but The Devil in the White City, Eric Larson.
Dude, dang. All right, you keep going. I'm going to tell you. There's an Eric Larson book I should have said as an honorable mention.
Hmm.
And it's the Lusitania one, Dead Wake.
Dead Wake.
That one's
that's
so good.
So good, yeah.
All right, keep going. Sorry.
So, The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. This has 648,000 ratings.
Wow.
4.00 overall. Rare to see. This came out back in 2003. This is a super, super popular book, obviously.
Wait, 4 point what?
It's a 4.0.
Okay.
I gave it a 5, obviously. But, so, I'll give you a quick little snippet. This one is so good. Author Eric Larson imbues the incredible events surrounding the 1893 Chicago World's Fair with such drama that readers may find themselves checking the book's categorization. I'm not going to try again. To be sure that The Devil in the White City is not, in fact, a highly imaginative novel. Larson tells the stories of two men, Daniel H. Burnham, the architect responsible for the fair's construction, and H. Holmes, a serial killer masquerading as a charming doctor. Burnham's challenge was immense. In a short period of time, he was forced to overcome the death of his partner and numerous other obstacles to construct the famous White City around the fair around which the fair was built. Man, I am illiterate. His efforts to complete the project and the fair's incredible success were skillfully related along with the entertaining appearances by such notables as Buffalo Bill Cody, Susan B. Anthony, and Thomas Edison. The activities of the sinister Dr. Holmes, who is believed to be responsible for scores of murders around the time of the fair, are equally remarkable. He devised and erected the World's Fair Hotel, complete with a crematorium and a gas chamber near the fairgrounds, and used the event as well as his own charismatic personality to lure victims, combining the story of an architect and a killer in one book, mostly in alternating chapters. Seems like an odd choice, but it works. The magical appeal and horrifying dark side of the 19th century Chicago are both revealed through Larson's skillful writing, and that is from John Moe, who I guess works for Goodreads or something. But anyway, long description, but that is a great, great book. The description fits it perfectly. I don't really need to say much else. It feels like you're reading a novel or watching a movie that's like, there's no way this was real. It's like H.
His
Holmes.
like that too.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Larson, absolute god in the nonfiction world. He's written some fiction.
Would you say his style is very specific?
Oh yeah, when you read, I could read Eric Larson not knowing it's him, but like, this is Eric Larson.
Yeah, like I've only read a couple, and I've audiobooked most of the ones I've read of his, and they all feel a very, like you were saying, like making nonfiction feel like fiction.
Yeah, like he's got. You mentioned Dead Wake about the Lusitania. He's got In the Garden of the Beast, which is about.
I read that one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the American ambassador to Germany in Berlin in the late 30s, leading up to Hitler. Crazy read. There's another one I read by him. I forget what it is, but anyway, really good book, super entertaining. H. Holmes is like what all of
Splendid in the Vial,
like 19th, 20th century like murder mysteries, and like him and Jack the Ripper are like what all that stuff comes from. Like the
See, I didn't know anything about that, honestly. Even after you just read that, it sounds fascinating.
It's so fascinating. So it's about two different men who, if I remember correctly, never actually that we know of cross paths. So you're reading about two different stories, but they're interwoven so well that it almost feels like there's going to be this culmination, but it's a real book, so he's not going to make up something that didn't happen. So anyway, number 8, The Devil in the White City, Eric Larson.
Nice, dude. I'm kind of mad I didn't put Dead Wake on there. And by the way, it's The Splendid in the Vial.
Splendid in the Vial, God.
I can just see it right behind you. That's the only reason.
That one is so good. That's a lot about Churchill and just in the period of time in World War II where they were just waiting to see Germany cross the channel and start really destroying them, like early on.
Yeah.
Because obviously it did happen to a degree, but it's the early on build up and what Winston Churchill had to deal with to like get Parliament and everybody. The Darkest Hour, really good movie with my favorite actor Gary Oldman. He plays Churchill. Kind of touches on some of the stuff that's in that book, if I remember correctly. So great movie. On to number 7.
All right, number 7 for me is a Wheel of Time book. It's The Great Hunt, which is the second Wheel of Time book. So it's got almost 300,000 ratings at a 4.26. It was written in 1990, November 1990. Obviously, this one is by Robert Jordan. Personally, The Wheel of Time is one of those books one of those series that, and I've told Jesse this. Jesse hasn't had a chance to read it yet, but he will.
Maybe.
It is like almost the epitome of epic fantasy, just because what Robert Jordan like sets out to do, which at the time of this, I've only read the first 6. So I mean, I'm not even halfway, which is crazy to think about. But it's just so expansive. Like everything he writes is so in depth. The world feels so rich, and how other authors might like briefly mention this group that's over here. He's not just going to briefly mention it. He's going to tell you about their customs, their language, what they do differently, who's their rivals. He's going to give you a bunch of different examples. Like, he's leaving nothing, I don't want to say to the imagination, but he just does such a good job of explaining how big the world is. And so anyway, The Wheel of Time, if you're someone who's really into fantasy, I mean, you got to read it. And if you've seen the show before, the show, I watched the first episode and I was immediately out. So, you know how it is. Don't really base the show if you've seen the show on Amazon Prime, which is a terrible platform, by the way. Don't read the book, because I mean, they're thick. Don't get me wrong, but especially the first two, I would say are worth reading, and then kind of decide after that. But anyway, The Great Hunt, the second of the Wheel of Time books.
Nice. We're on 7. Yeah.
Yes.
So my 7 is Dune. So
Okay.
we don't need
We're
to say
on the
anything
same
else
spot.
about it. I'll
That's
just go ahead and
interesting.
just go to my 6, and then we'll just swap our order running.
Okay.
So on to number 6 then. Mine is The Accidental President by A.J. Baime or Baime. I'm not sure. B-A-I-M-E. This book only has just under 9,000 ratings and a 4.54 overall. I don't know how in the world this book is not more popular than it is.
4.54 though?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying.
It's
Everybody that's
huge.
read it loves it. It's so freaking good. So this book, I'll just give you the little... Heroes are often defined as ordinary characters who get pushed into extraordinary circumstances, and through courage and a dash of luck, cement their place in history. Chosen as FDR's fourth-term vice president for his well-praised work ethic, good judgment, and lack of enemies, Harry S. Truman was the prototypical ordinary man. That is, until he was shockingly thrust in over his head after FDR's sudden death. The first 4 months of Truman's administration saw the founding of the United Nations, the fall of Berlin, victory at Okinawa, fire bombings in Tokyo, the first atomic explosion, the Nazi surrender, the liberation of concentration camps, mass starvation in Europe, the Potsdam Conference, the controversial decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the surrender of Imperial Japan, and finally the end of World War II and the rise of the Cold War. The first 4 months of his presidency.
That's a lot.
After FDR had been president for 150 years. No other president had ever faced so much in such a short period of time. The accidental president escorts readers into the Situation Room with Truman during a tumultuous history-making 120 days when the stakes were high and the challenges even higher. So
Wow.
this is like, I almost wonder if it should be higher on my list. Again, I am shook that this book is not bigger in at least the Goodreads nonfiction history community. It is so good. You will be, again, I've said this, and I'll probably say this a lot in these videos, no matter what you think about certain events and certain people in history, to read about men and women who were thrust, as this says, thrust into a situation very much of not their own making, and what they have to do with the pressure of an entire nation.
The world.
And the whole world, your entire nation, the boys on the front lines, this entire generation of 18-year-olds that was just being swept off the face of the earth, and Imperial Japan at the time, just all these different things for this man to be put in this position. And not only are most vice presidents just so, a lot of times in history, so just kind of out of the loop and like unimportant. I mean, they really, it's still a thing today. The vice president just does not be doing and he was out of the loop on a lot of stuff, especially for being a wartime vice president. So FDR dies, and this man's president. And there could not have been a worse time in history for this to happen to a man.
Yeah. That's true.
And then, the biggest thing is the dropping of the atomic bombs, as far as decisions he had to make in the first 4 months of his presidency. And obviously that is, Oppenheimer's about to come out by Christopher Nolan. I'm seeing it on Sunday.
That'll be great.
You're seeing it Thursday.
We
It's
should
obviously
review
a
that
huge event. We definitely should review
with
Oppenheimer.
Jeb. We should wait. We shouldn't talk about it. We should not talk about it with each other until then.
Yeah, for sure. When you get into that moment in history and in Harry Truman's life, it becomes so impactful. And again, regardless of what you think, even if you don't agree how he got to the decision, there's just so much more understanding that we just, especially people our age, if you're our age or younger, or even a bit older, most people alive really to a degree nowadays, we just don't understand the gravity of being
at war.
A world at war.
Or
and
the potential of what could happen.
The potential of what could happen. And we also don't
here
understand.
Here in America.
Yeah. Like one of the biggest things people don't understand about the atomic bombs, for instance, is that we were not the only ones trying to make them. So like this wasn't a thing of, I'm not even going to get into the political stuff for my opinion, but there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, his generals told him, you can throw 1 million more 18-year-olds at Japan or we can drop a bomb. They ended up dropping 2. But he was faced with 1 million citizens and I'm not saying he made the right decision or anything like that, but that's just one piece of this book and how much he had to deal with. And I don't see how you couldn't read this. And he definitely had flaws, some that would be very prevalent today that would make him get canceled, I'm sure. But when you look at him as a president, I mean, it's hard not to.
He steps up to the plate.
He steps up to the plate. That's a perfect way to say it. So that is my number 6, The Accidental President by A.J. Baim.
I'm gonna have to. That one actually. That one intrigues me. I'm gonna have to read that one. Probably
it's so good.
All right, my number 6 is George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones, the first book in the Game of Thrones, or in the Song of Ice and Fire theory.
Let's go.
So this has 2.3 million ratings, 4.4 overall, which I'm not even gonna read the thing for it because I mean, if you don't know what A Game of Thrones is based off the HBO show or what the Song of Ice and Fire series is, then
you're not going to care if you don't know at this point.
Exactly.
I mean, this is either news or it's not.
Yeah, I mean, just his writing is so good. And this is what really first got me into the grimdark subgenre of fantasy, which is just morally great characters. And basically no one being safe. I haven't even really seen the show. I've seen, I think, a couple episodes in the first season. But the main reason I haven't want to watch it, or I have not watched it, is because I want to finish the books first. Just because I don't want to know. I don't want to know anything that happens. And I know, like, later on it breaks away from the literature, but even I've just heard, like, the second and third books are just so good. And I've really dropped the ball on reading these again. But, I mean, I just remember how, when I was reading this, the characters were just so, like, just so amazing. Like, the way he writes these characters is so amazing, especially with how bad some of these characters are, like bad people they are, and you're still just like, I hope they're alive. Like for some reason, it's like, this person should be dead for sure. But anyway, A Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, definitely a must read. Which we gotta partner read that one again because it was probably 3 or 4 years ago that I read that book.
Yeah. So all I can contribute to this would be the show. I've not read any Game of Thrones. The show, I mean, nothing new. The show is amazing.
Yeah.
Until the last season or two, it definitely falls off hard.
Which that's when it separates from the books, right?
It's actually, I think, around season 4 or 5. Again, I haven't read the books, but if I understand what I've watched on YouTube correctly, it's around the 4th or 5th season.
Gotcha.
But amazing. I mean, groundbreaking, some would say.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the fact he hasn't finished it is a red flag.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you watching the show is TBA because he's not even done. So.
Yeah. Exactly.
That it for 6?
That's it for 6, yeah.
All right, so we're on to number 5. We are in the top half here. Number 5, you probably expect this to be on my list. Guns, Germs, and Steel: The Fates of Human Societies by Jared Diamond. This is I believe, a Pulitzer Prize winner. I could be wrong on that. It should be if it's not.
What's the rating on that book?
So we got 390,000 reviews, and we got a 4.04. So, not too bad.
Okay.
This book is, to my understanding, I mean, to me for sure, but to my understanding, just in general in the book world, as far as nonfiction and history and stuff, this is like on the Mount Rushmore of like, it's. Let me just read the description. Let me read it. Diamond has written a book of remarkable scope, one of the most important and readable works on the human past published in recent years. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize and a national bestseller, the global account of the rise of civilization that is also a stunning refutation of ideas of human development based on race. In this artful, informative, and delightful book, Jared Diamond convincingly argues that geographical and environmental factors shape the modern world. Societies that had a head start in food production advanced beyond the hunter-gatherer stage and then developed writing, tech, government, and organized religion, as well as nasty germs and potent weapons of war, and adventured on sea and land to conquer and decimate Pre-literate cultures. A major advance in our understanding of human societies, Guns, Germs, and Steel chronicles the way that the modern world came to be and stunningly dismantles racially based theories of human history. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize, the Phi Beta Kappa Award in Science, the Roan Polink Prize, and the Commonwealth Club of California's Gold Medal. So I've never read that description on Goodreads before, and that sounded, I mean, that's definitely a good description of it. It sounded like a little more like, it's definitely, he starts the book off talking about race, and that's definitely where the book goes, but I don't know, I felt like the description made it sound like more about race than it really is. It's just, I mean, it is foundationally, but it is just essentially what it says. It's about the early rise of, from the Fertile Crescent, human civilization, and it's fascinating to read how, depending on just, how close this village was to the river, how close they were to the ocean, how cold it was here, how well crops or this type of livestock thrived in this environment versus that one. Because the big thing to understand, obviously, is these pre-literate societies or, people way back when, they didn't have the same, first of all, they didn't have all the history and the science that we now can base so many decisions off of. But everything they learned the hard way in a way that we don't understand. So having generations of farming knowledge was not as simple as it sounds. Having generations of understanding, if we kill too many of this population in this area, we're going to lose this, this resource, whatever it may be. And this is the first in a series. The other two books are Collapse and Upheaval. I have read Collapse, not Upheaval yet, but they're all just about pretty much the rise and fall of civilizations. This one's just really about the rise of all civilizations, the fall of some of them, and how we got here. Collapse is an amazing book, too. The only reason it probably wouldn't be in my top 10, but it'd be up there, top 25 for sure. Jared Diamond's a genius. He just has a way of looking at all this anthropology, archaeology, all this stuff we have, and just painting a picture. And again, maybe it's because of my biases or whatever, but I didn't really read it so much as an argument against some type of racial comments, because I don't know. I've not heard a lot of those comments. So, again, maybe I'm sheltered or, not listening or whatever. But I can definitely see how it is that and how it could be used to make those arguments very well. And I totally agree with every point he makes in this book. Not at all saying I don't. But it was just more absolutely fascinating to me to read just about how we got where. I mean, it's literally the book. The subtitle should just be How We Got Here. I mean, it is super fascinating. Again, it's heavy on geography and the environment. Everything Jared Diamond does is, and he is the master at that stuff. I mean, Jared Diamond, both of those books I've read by him, it's one of those books that actually changed me a bit and made me realize man, I don't care to think about some things that are extremely important. I don't care to have, or I've never thought to have this perspective, and you can't until you read about it or learn about it or whatever, but it just kind of made me realize how much I don't know, how much perspective I don't have, and just how circumstantial it is that you and I are here recording this podcast, and Jim Bob is, doing what he's doing. What's her name is doing what she's doing in Germany, and somebody is out, in Alaska. It's just in Africa, in the UK, just how all these different things decide where we are today beyond our own control. And, again, I think that's pretty prevalent today. I think in some ways I'm not even going to go there. It's very prevalent today to understand this kind of stuff. It's obviously on a much wider scale than just America, because America is just one place. But great read. Top 5, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those books that even if you don't ever even look at the history section at a bookstore, I mean, you've probably heard of Guns, Germs, and Steel. That's just one of those. Yeah. It's kind of transcended.
Yeah. And it's one of the few books that, and let me just remind myself, it's the only book in my top 10 that if someone was asking me, a book that I would say you need to read that book. You need to read this book. I plan, it's been a year and a half, 2 years since I read it, maybe more than 2 years actually. I plan to read it every few years just because it is so profound. It informs everything else I read about nonfiction. So yeah, super important book, I think. That's number 5.
That was
Sorry, I
number
went
5.
kind of long.
All right, my number 5 is the last book in a quartet called The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, and it's called, well, the first book is called Malice, which I'll read like the intro to, but it's called Wrath, which is kind of interesting. There's not like a ton of quartets, you know. Normally you see trilogies.
Right.
But anyway, 4 books, John Gwynne, which John Gwynne has kind of really started to pop off like more recently. He's had some books come out that I can think of kind of like escalated him over, but this is, if I believe so, like one of his first series that he wrote. I would kind of compare it as a, you know, it's a journey, a chosen one story, you know, of a young kid. But it's not a chosen one story that the kid is annoying. Like, I feel like there's other chosen one like narratives where you don't even really like the main character. This is one where it's actually interesting, and it's kind of your classic chosen one, but he doesn't want to be the chosen one. And he, for a long time, doesn't even know that he is the chosen one. But some great character work. Like, one of my favorite characters across all of the books I've ever read, his name's Macwin, is in this book, or in this series. And it's just, I mean, the way John Gwynne writes characters is really special. And then you would also appreciate John Gwynne, too, because it is a medieval fantasy. There's some light magic in these, but not really a ton. It's more on the, I guess, like Joe Abercrombie scale, where there's not a lot. But I would compare John Gwynne to Joe Abercrombie, and I think I did this in the last one. He is a filtered Joe Abercrombie. So instead of like using the blatant cuss words and things like that, he's not doing that. He has his own curse words in it. But anyway, but it doesn't take anything away from the story. That's the cool thing about John Gwynne, is he's able to write really good fantasy, but that is clean. So if you're someone that cares about not wanting to read a ton of cuss words or like graphic sex scenes, John Gwynne's the guy for you, without really taking away and it feeling like YA at all. But you would appreciate him because he does, like, because it's like a more medieval lifestyle, he like calls weapons like by their actual name, and like used a lot of historical terms for like however many men are in a group or like within a battle. And so like I actually had to look up a lot of words, like, because they're not like made up words that he's made like in Sanderson, where it's like a part of the world. It's like historically like medieval words that we just don't use anymore that refer to things in war, or like a specific like type of sword. So he's someone who's like really done his research to kind of base this fantastical world on. But anyway, it's 4 books, great character work. I mean, huge twists, some of the biggest twists of all time in this series, but really his character work is just really, really good. I mean, it's up there with Joe Abercrombie for me, and especially the way that he does it without cussing and without being so graphic, honestly, is impressive. Because it's almost like some of those comedians that are like still so good, and yet they like are
like a
only
Brian
clean.
Regan.
Well, who's the other guy too? There's another guy.
Gaffigan? Jim Gaffigan, maybe?
No. If you mentioned him, I saw him on Theo Vaughn's podcast recently, and I didn't realize he was a clean comedian. But anyway.
You sure it wasn't Brian Regan? Because I think he was on it recently.
No, if you said his name, I'd know it. I mean, not that guy's not. But anyway.
Yeah.
It's just impressive because, like, you know, sometimes it's tough to like vocalize what you want to say and paint a dark world without like using dark words.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, Joe Abercrombie stole my list, and it is above John Gwynne. So it's not like, you know, I don't like reading curse words, but it is something that is impressive and like honestly admirable that I like that John Gwynne's done it and shown that like you don't necessarily have to fall into that, because there's some other like authors that I've read a little bit of, and I'm like, this is just unnecessary.
Yeah.
So, which, I mean, once I get to Joe Abercrombie, I'll talk more about that. But anyway, John Gwynne, if you don't know about him in the fantasy world, you need to read his stuff. He's kind of like, I feel like, kind of just coming up now. But anyway, that is my book 5. Wrath is actually the one I had at 5. So again, we're doing it to where if you can have one book on the series, but I'm not going to have like Wrath and then Malice and then, you know.
Yeah.
Just to give some diversity.
All right.
So you're 4.
Sweet. Number 4. Number 4 for me, Rubicon, The Last Years of the Roman Republic by Tom Holland. No, not Spider-Man. This has got 19,000 ratings with a 4.20. 420, blaze it. On Goodreads. Came out in 2005. So it is what it says. The last years of the Roman Republic. This description is pretty epic. In 49 BC, the 705th year since the founding of Rome, Julius Caesar crossed a small border river called the Rubicon and plunged Rome into cataclysmic civil war. Tom Holland's enthralling account tells a story of Caesar's generation, witness to the twilight of the Republic and its bloody transformation into an empire. From Cicero, Spartacus, and Brutus to Cleopatrica, Virgil, and Augustus, here are some of the most legendary figures in history brought thrillingly to life. Combining verve and freshness with scrupulous scholarship, Rubicon is not only an engrossing history of this pivotal era, but a uniquely resonant portrait of a great civilization in all its extremes of self-sacrifice and rivalry, decadence and catastrophe, intrigue, war, and world-shaking ambition. This is one of the best books of all time that I've ever read.
So when you recommended Jeb, right, and he read it?
Yeah, it's so good. You get chills reading this book. It is so epic. The fact that they have not made a movie based off this book about Caesar and everything surrounding it is insane to me. Like,
Yeah.
Denis needs to get on that once he's done with Dune. Because, like, his style would just be
It's
so
just too
perfect.
easy.
It's just so epic, man. Like, just that scene alone when you get very early on, and he's just painting a picture of Julius Caesar's grand armies crossing the Rubicon. This man just said, I'm taking Rome for myself. I'm taking it. Like, and he does. So this is amazing. If you have any interest in that period at all, if you have or have not read a lot about it, this is so good. It's not a long read. It's 464 pages. It's not a long read. It's a little book. And it is so good, man. It is just so it's like, again, I keep saying this, it's like a movie, dude. He just has a way of writing it to where you're like, did this really happen? And again, like I said with Cleopatra, some of this stuff you're not so sure about, but they mention, good historians say, it says this, but this guy also said this, so maybe this is what happened. Yeah. But for the most part, you're getting a pretty clear picture of what went down with him specifically. And like it says, you get other people in there. But I will say, if you're into this, you read it and you like it, you need to read the next book. I don't know if it's a series, but his other book called Dynasty is specifically about from Julius Caesar to Nero, the 6 Caesars total from him to him. And very prevalent to our time as well, specifically with things like Epstein's Island and the people at power. Like, you read Dynasty and you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I highly recommend. I have another Tom Holland book that I haven't read yet called Dominion that I'm looking forward to. He is just an amazing author. I listen to him on a podcast sometimes. He is so freaking smart. And this is a great read. Like I said, it's entertaining. So even if you don't like history, like, this is one you could read and be thoroughly satisfied with the experience. So yeah, that's number 4 for me.
Nice. All right, my number 4, speaking of Joe Abercrombie, my last book with John Gwynne, is The Last Argument of Kings, which is the third book in the First Law trilogy. So this book has, it is again the third book, so, take what you get from that. But it's a 4.33, 144,000 ratings. Let me see what the first book in the First Law. So The Blade itself has 4.20, 200,000 reviews. So anyway, I know I've talked kind of extensively about Joe Abercrombie because I did review this 3 standalone. So if you haven't seen that, go watch that, which come after the First Law trilogy. But this series is amazing. Outright amazing. It is a must read if you're someone who likes fantasy. You have to read it. So the only reason I've seen a lot of people kind of give this more hype than the Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire is because it's actually finished. So you're not having to wait. Like, Joe Abercrombie actually is finishing his stuff. But it's on that level. It's a dark, grimy world where you just don't know what's going to happen. People are getting killed left and right. The characters are insane, and they're all so unique. And I know I've talked about this a ton before, but unique characters. Again, the best character I've ever read in any book, a guy named Glotka. Just everything about all of his characters are very unique, very specific. You can feel their presence immediately. Lots of dialogue, very fast-paced books. It's a epic fantasy, but without a lot of high magic systems, so you're not having to try and figure out what's going on. Definitely more political, if anything. But great series. If you've not read the First Law series, you really are missing out. It is so good. Again, though, just to preface this, like I did say with John Gwynn, I mean, he is very graphic. Lots of cuss words. I mean, it seems pretty excessive at some points, but I mean, he's just doing a job of painting a really dark world. But anyway, what's it called? The Last Argument of Kings is my number 4. Amazing book, which you got to read those soon, seriously.
I will, for
It's
sure.
in the next year or two.
All right, we're breaking into our top 3 here.
3.
I'm so glad that you haven't said this yet, so I could take one from you like you took Dune, because I know this is on your list, and we're higher up, so it's going to be more of a dagger for you. Number 3 for me is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson.
It's not on my list.
No way. You're
No,
capping so hard right now.
I'm not. I have a different one. I have a different.
Oh,
Sanderson.
okay. Fair.
So I have a Stormlight, but
Okay, fair. I just started Oathbringer, so I've only read as far as the Stormlight Archive, The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, and the little novella Edge Dancer.
it's actually a Dancer.
Huh? It's Edge Dancer is my number 1. Okay, so number 3, Words of Radiance, Brandon Sanderson. This is the second in the Stormlight Archive. 308,000 ratings, 4.76.
I've heard that that's the highest rated book of all time on
It's
Goodreads.
the highest rated book of all time.
With that
with
amount,
with
like
over 10,000.
Yeah.
I think is what the shout out
The
what the
status.
Tudor Ramble guy said. So there's not much I can say about this book without kind of spoiling it, because it is the second in a series. What I can say is, I mean, this is one of 2 of the books, including Dune, that are
This is your number
fiction.
3?
This is my number 3. I mean, I'm a mostly nonfiction reader.
Yeah.
This is my favorite fiction book I've ever read by like a million miles. It even
Yeah,
passes
it's not
Dune
close.
by a lot.
Yeah.
And I love Dune. It's in my top 10, as you know. So this book is amazing. I cried during this book, which I probably cry a little bit. I tear up a little bit in almost every book I read, nonfiction or fiction. But this book, tears came down my eyes.
That book hits multiple times.
Mu-
You better be
multiple
ready
times
to
I was struggling.
cry in Oathbringer, my
I know,
friend.
man. I'm not ready, but I mean, what is there to say about Sanderson? Like, the writing is godlike. It's the most engaging writing that I've ever read in a fiction book. I've never cared about characters so much. I've never cared about characters, bro. I go to sleep thinking, what's gonna happen to my boy? What's gonna happen to my girl? Like, what's gonna happen to my sprint? Like, dude, sleepless nights. I mean, I had to stay up when I finished this book. I had to stay up till like 3 a.m. because I had I started late and I had like 250 pages left, and then I got into that last 150 and I was like, oh, there's no
Can't stop.
stopping.
No.
There's no
You
stopping.
can't stop.
You can't stop in the middle of a Sanderlanche, which so far all of his books have had to some degree or another.
They're
Just
all
an
that way,
absolute,
yeah.
whoa, wait, what's happening? You're just not ready.
I just remember talking to you about this, and this is just the epitome of Brandon Sanderson. You will never care so much about something that's not real.
Never.
You will never be so invested in figuring out what's going on and what could be happening and just hoping and praying certain things happen so much about a world that's not real.
And this is coming, I agree with you, and at least from my perspective, this is coming from someone who is, like, I'm not going to call myself a cinephile by any means, but I've watched so many movies, and I cry in a lot of movies too. I've cared about a lot of characters that are not real. I mean, I Am Iron Man got me hard. Doesn't even compare to Words of Radiance.
No.
It does not even remotely compare.
Which is crazy to say, but it's
I don't
just
think
one
I've
of
cared
those
about anything in my
experiences.
real life as much as I care about these
Dude,
characters before.
Dude, I've never dove
Almost.
so hard into Reddit than I have them with the Stormlight
I've had to stay
Archive.
away because I haven't finished as you
But
have.
it's just Brandon Sanderson, which I mean, we'll talk about this with me too, but I mean, what does his storyboard look like? Because if you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, it is just, you're 4 books in and you're like, oh, like, he's tying stuff back in from the first book. It's just, he has thought of everything.
Yeah.
Like, seriously everything, and he cranks them out. And the thing is these books are coming out quick.
Yeah, because he's got all these other Cosmere
Yeah.
books, non-Cosmere books. I mean, he
He's
just
not
released that
waiting.
other Yumi the Nightmare Painter or
Yeah.
whatever. I didn't even know that. I guess that's the thing with, like, the same thing as Tress in these books,
Yeah.
where it's like his project he's been doing. But I discovered him after that project, unfortunately. But, yeah, I mean, this is... The only reason this isn't my favorite book of all time is because I'm such a nonfiction lover and history lover. So those books do truly beat out. Just 2 of them that I've read so far in my life do beat out Words of Radiance. But when I first read Words of Radiance, I had a little recency bias, obviously. When I finished Words of Radiance, I thought that's the best book I've ever read in my entire life.
Yeah.
Then once I got away from it a little bit, I wasn't reading Sanderson. I was like, okay, there are some books that I did like that do mean more to me. But I mean, it was tough not to put it at number one.
As far as fiction, obviously, I mean, nothing's close.
Nothing's close, dude. And
So
I
far.
love the Dune series.
Yeah.
Like, I love the Dune series, and this blows it out of the water, dude. It's not in the water anymore.
Dude, I can't wait for you to read Rhythm of War, bro. Oh my god. Well, just after this book, it's gonna be huge. We're having a review here soon with Oathbringer. Man.
Well, we'll do the whole Stormlight archive.
True.
We'll have
we
to.
do need to go back. But
which is gonna be tough. But
you can't. The only knock I would say on Sanderson, which for us it's not a knock, but for maybe the common reader, his books are long.
These ones are, yeah.
But
the Stormlight
I don't
they're like
wish,
12 to 14.
Do you wish they were shorter? Because
No,
I
dude.
don't. I wish boldly
Dude,
enough. I wish they were long.
I'm looking for some 2,000 pagers
Dude,
in this
I'm
series.
serious. I would read them. I would read
no
them.
doubt, dude.
That's the
I'd
thing.
eat
So it's not for the faint of heart, but if you're someone who considers yourself a reader and you have not, like, if you really are like identify as a reader, especially within the fantasy realm, and you haven't even started the Way of Kings, you're behind.
You're behind.
Behind.
And I'm behind,
Far.
and just in general in fiction. But I'm glad I've read I'm in this series, and I've read this book in particular because now I can. I mean, it's sure a lot of people, a lot of tier lists I've watched, Sanderson and Stormlight are not at the top, but almost everybody mentions the Stormlight archive. I mean, it's gold. That's my number 3. Words of Radiance. Brandon Sanderson, number 2 in the Stormlight archive. I love you, Sil.
Bars, Mo Ash, you suck. My number 3 is.
That was a spoiler, by the way.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
It is now that I said that.
I mean,
Sorry, you're number 3.
my number 3 is controversial because a lot of people have it as 1, but we've talked about this. It's my favorite, movie series of all time. So it is The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah. Okay.
And I love Tolkien. Like, I really do. And I'm not a hater who's, like, trying to come up with some new, like, thing because everybody's putting Lord of the Rings at number 1. It's just going off pure enjoyment. Obviously, I get the gravity. Like, if we're going, like, based off what's the most important.
Lord of the Rings.
Well, Lord of the Rings.
Every
So,
time.
like, but that's not what this list is for me. This list is my favorite books to read. Yeah. So, it's still 3 up there. And especially when it comes to, like, adaptations, I mean, I don't know of one that's even close. I mean, the Dune one's good, and we'll see what happens in part 2, but as far as like a 3-part series or 3 movies back to back to back, I mean, it's just so good. The characters, obviously, it lays the groundwork for everything. I mean, people have talked for hours and hours on Tolkien.
Yeah, this is nothing new.
But he's someone that's just fascinating to me. I read his biography. Just a really cool guy. And obviously a guy with lots of depth. But, yeah, I mean, the Lord of the Rings series has always been up there for me. And then The Return of the King, I mean, just hits so tough. But 4.56 on Goodreads, 800,000 reviews. So, I mean, close to...
And what's crazy is The Lord of the Rings is actually 1 book.
Yeah.
But, I mean, think of just the capitalization on them making it 3 books.
Yeah, that's tough.
I mean, it's crazy.
So,
That's it?
that is my 3, yeah. Return of the
Tolkien.
King. Yeah, I'll keep it short.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
not much we can say.
Number 2 for me is Destiny of the Republic, A Tale of Madness, Medicine, and the Murder of a President by Candace Millard. This is about James A. Garfield. Many of you may have never heard the name, but you've got to read this book. If you care about history at all, you've got to read this book, American history.
What's the title again?
Destiny of the Republic, Candace Millard. This has got 71,000 reviews. It's got a 4.19 rating. This is amazing. Again, cried like a baby in this book. So James A. Garfield, and I'm so sorry, I'm going to do this a lot. My memory doesn't serve me well sometimes. I believe he was the 23rd president. It was either 20th or 23rd.
Okay.
It wasn't 20th. I think it was 23rd.
What time period are we looking at?
This was, I believe it was 1890 or something when he took office. 1891. I know McKinley was the turn of the century, so I think that's about right. Because I think McKinley was, if I remember correctly, I can't remember. I'm not going to butcher myself here, but regardless, you get to know a president that was only president for 4 months and then was assassinated by a madman. Um, and it's just one of those things. It's so impactful because, just to give you a little bit, let me just say this. Let me just, again, do this. James A. Garfield was one of the most extraordinary men ever elected president. Born into abject poverty, he rose to become a wonderkind scholar, a Civil War hero, and a renowned and admired reformist congressman. Nominated for president against his will, he engaged in a fierce battle with the corrupt political establishment. But 4 months after his inauguration, a deranged office seeker tracked Garfield down and shot him in the back. But the shot didn't kill Garfield. The drama of what happened subsequently is a powerful story of a nation in turmoil. The unhinged assassin's half-delivered strike shattered the fragile national mood of a country so recently fractured by civil war and left the wounded president as the object of a bitter behind-the-scenes struggle for power over his administration, over the nation's future, and hauntingly over his medical care. A team of physicians administered shockingly archaic treatments to disastrous effect. As his condition worsened, Garfield received help. Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, worked around the clock to invent a new device capable of finding the bullet. Meticulously researched, epic in scope, and pulsating with an intimate human focus and high-velocity narrative drive, The Destiny of the Republic will stand alongside The Devil in the White City and The Professor and the Madman as a classic of Nair, and it's just not letting me hit the button that says read more, but I think you get the picture. This book's amazing. One of the coolest things about it is that James A. Garfield did not want to be president, actively rejected it until he was essentially forced into it. And let me tell you guys, there have been several presidents in history who did not want the presidency, starting with the first one, George Washington. And again, regardless of what you think of anybody throughout history, that is, I mean, it's not a new thing to say that power corrupts and that we desire more power and more control in our lives. To be so attuned to your own self and to the nature of man that you can foresee, that's not good for anybody, and I don't want it. I don't want to be the guy to have this power and responsibility and to potentially corrupt the presidency. Good men, better than you or me or anybody watching this video, like James A. Garfield, not necessarily anybody, don't freak out, but a guy like James A. Garfield, it's just fascinating to read about. This guy didn't want it. He did it anyway because the people wanted it, and ends up getting killed shortly on. But in his 4 months, man, I got 2 books in my top 10 about 4 months of a presidency, and his is even more I shouldn't say more fascinating than Truman's first 4 months. But just reading about him is crazy. Reading about the time period is crazy. The medical stuff is insane because you're essentially reading this, like, shaking your hands, like, what are y'all doing? Like, because we just know so much more now. But it's frustrating because people in other parts of the world, in Europe specifically, also knew that what they were doing was very dangerous and going to cause infection. I mean, they're essentially at one point in the book, dude, this dude's like fisting Garfield's back trying to get this bullet out of him. I mean, no Germ-X. There's no Germ-X, all right? There's no hand sanitizer. At this point? Oh, no, dude. Our boy's absolutely just struggling. And he was so polite about it. That's one of the things that's really impactful, dude. He's so polite about, like, and he's in horrible pain. So yeah, it's really, and he was a flawed man, just like any. There are, he cheated on his wife at one point before the presidency, which was, nobody freaking cares nowadays, but very big deal back in the 1890s. Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, Jeb.
So yeah, that's number 2 for me. It is such a good read. Candace Millard is a prolific writer. She is great. She's got several really good books. One that I can think of off the top of my head is River of Doubt, about Theodore Roosevelt post-presidency going down the Amazon River like a psychopath. It's crazy. So yeah, Destiny of the Republic, James A. Garfield. You've probably never heard of him, but you'll be fascinated to learn. Is that surprising that book's on there to you?
I mean, after you read the description, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you were to been, I just don't. He's one of those presidents, I guess, because he only lasted 4 months. You just don't.
Yeah. He didn't have a big impact on history in general. Yeah. Frankly, he would have, I think, very much so had he, had to serve, especially had he had a full term, especially too. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. All right, my number 2 is a book in a series you already mentioned. It is Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson.
Wow, I'm so excited.
So that's my number 2. God, it's such a good book, man.
You can't say a lot.
Can't say a lot. But what I can say is that this book is dark and sad and gives you a lot more perspective on the rest of the series. And obviously Dalinar, who is like the or the guy who gets the flashbacks. But man, is it so good. And especially the moments in this, it was really tough for me to pick between which book I like more in the series between Oathbringer and Words of Radiance. But it was tough.
I love that you picked this one though, because that just makes me even more excited that I'm just started reading it last night.
So I went back and forth. I had Words of Radiance at first, and I think I was just getting overhyped about the rating because the rating's higher.
On which one?
So the rating's higher on Words of Radiance. So
right.
This has 4.62 though. So I mean, it's still just insane. But I mean, 4.7 is ridiculous.
But 4.6, I mean, these books don't get ratings
reviews.
like that. Like, that's crazy.
It's insane. But it's just so good. So much more depth is added to the world. And I would say Oathbringer kind of takes you to a level where you kind of understand everything that's going on in the world of Roshar to an extent. You get way more. And then, I mean, Rhythm of War, they just kind of savage you all back again. But for the most part, like, you're just kind of taken to the level you need to be at. And then, I mean, just Dalinar is just such a good character, man. And the more depth you get on Dalinar, just, you feel bad for him, but you just have more understanding of the whole situation. Some big things obviously happen in this book. But, again, if you have not started reading the Stormlight Archive,
it's time.
God, dude, it's just so good. All right, give us your number one. I'll give you my number one.
All right, number one is American Ulysses by Ronald C. White.
You recently read that, right?
It's been about 2 years, probably.
Oh.
So American Ulysses by Ronald C. White. Again, Ronald C. White, he was in my honorable mentions with A. Lincoln, is a prolific writer, prolific historian. And this book has 5,400 ratings, 4.17. I mean, again, I'm fascinated. I know Ron Chernow's has a lot more ratings, is a lot more popular. And Chernow, again, you could read either one of them and be fine. But this one, American Ulysses, particularly for me, I think it's just because I love Ronald C. White's writing so much. Ronald C. White Jr., by the way. I haven't been throwing that in there. Don't get it confused. But yeah, so Ulysses S. Grant is one of, I mean, he's my favorite American figure in history. One of my favorite of all time. Fascinating figure. Again, not that I'm not trying to condescend to anyone, but if you don't read history, sometimes you can get a little lost in other things. Loving to read about a figure, you know, I love to read about, you know, a lot of figures that are not even good people, but loving a figure and reading about that figure and learning about them and seeing how they made decisions and, you know, how they live their life and their personality. It's not signing off on everything they ever did. Ulysses S. Grant was a very flawed man. He was not as the drunk as some historians, you know, present him to be. A lot of that is very embellished and conflated, in my opinion, based upon what I've read. But it was there, and that's just one of his flaws. Like all of us, we have a lot, but that's what makes this stuff so good, especially when you're looking at the context of the time. And this is obviously a very hot topic, hot period of time. This is, I mean, he was the general of the Union Army during the Civil War. Just a reminder for everyone, that was the side fighting to end slavery, in case you don't remember. He was the 18th president of the United States, so he came in after Abraham Lincoln's predecessor, Johnson, whatever his name was, Andrew Johnson, who Andrew Johnson kind of undid things that Abraham Lincoln did as far as, you know, emancipating slaves and civil rights, all that stuff.
Letting them off the
Ulysses had to get back in there and kind of undo some of Johnson's stuff. And he did some crazy stuff. I mean, obviously, him as the general of the Union Army, I mean, I've got books on all his campaigns. Like, he was a god. They still use tactics that Ulysses S. Grant used in the Civil War. They still learn these tactics in the American military today because it was foundational stuff. Just his ability to work with the geography around him and to strategize. I mean, he took some gambles, and he lost on them a couple of times, but not much. He won most of the time. And a lot of his criticisms can be that obviously there's, you know, at one point he did inherit a slave, but he shortly thereafter freed him. So obviously that is always there when you're talking about this time period and the time period before it. And there's no excuse for that at all, obviously. But he did break away from it, and it ended up, you know, by the time he was the general of the Union Army, he abhorred slavery and called it, I may be getting the word wrong, but he essentially called it that great, what what's the word he used? Like a very negative connotation, like an
Blight?
abhorrent thing. Huh?
It's not a great blight on American history.
Blight. A blight would be a good word. He used something a little more vehement, but essentially, he was a god on the battlefield. When he became president, he did a lot of things to hold the Union together. I mean, that's what Ulysses S. Grant did. He held the Union together after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction era. A lot of problems with the Reconstruction era, but Grant did a pretty dang good job with what he was handed. You know, he sent Union soldiers down to the South on several occasions to stop, civil rights from being infringed upon after emancipation. So, and there's just a lot of personal things about him. I mean, he came from hard scrabble, poverty, even after, before the Civil War started and after he had already been very involved in the military. He was a broke man having to sell his personal belongings to keep his family afloat. Ends up becoming president of the United States. One historian has said, and I forget which one it was, but it was in a documentary about Grant. One historian has said that the story of Ulysses S. Grant is the tumultuous American story. Just from where he came from to the heights that he rose to. The highest seat you can possibly have. So Ulysses S. Grant is one of our great presidents. It's hard, and he is my favorite to read about. Obviously, Lincoln is up there too, but I think that's almost why I love Grant so much, is because he's kind of the underdog of the era. He was just as good in different ways, and not the intellectual ways that Abraham Lincoln was, and not all the growth that Abraham Lincoln had during his presidency. But it's hard when you have another president, two presidents after Abraham Lincoln, to give him the clout that he deserves, because Abraham Lincoln, is...
Lincoln got killed, and I feel like that's what gives him a lot of his fame.
For sure. And just, emancipation, obviously, all that stuff, Gettysburg Address, all these things.
His view on slavery, though, is not as black and white as people think.
No pun intended. But no, it wasn't. It became...
Was Ulysses pretty...
He grew, too. It took him, a time in his life before he was where we would consider, okay, you're in a good spot, especially for the context of the time. Abraham Lincoln, though, I mean, the beginning of Lincoln's presidency, or the beginning of the Civil
He's a free
War...
soiler, yeah.
He literally, there's a quote you can read that we know Abraham Lincoln said. He said, if it would keep the Union together, I would keep slavery. If it would keep the Union together, I would abolish slavery. That was at the beginning of the Civil War. That's all he cared about. But by his second term, the man abhorred slavery. And personally, there's a lot to suggest that he did all throughout his life, but in the first term of his presidency, not that it makes it right, but he wasn't sure that he could win the battles that he thought were worth fighting.
Politics is
it's very complicated.
You can't call it like giving up things to get things, especially when people's lives are on the line, but it is something that is in the context of the era.
Yeah.
But,
and Lincoln definitely grew a lot, as we know.
Oh, for sure.
But Grant, like I said, he's kind of the underdog of the era, even though, again, he was a god in the war. Just a lot of epic moments in his life, especially, again, when you know where he came from. Ronald C. White Jr. is an amazing author, so I think this is the best book about him. I think it's like 800 or 900 pages, so it is a little dense. But if you like history, especially this era, especially American history, I think this is a must-read. I think Grant is an American hero, and that's my number one book of all time, American Ulysses, A Life of Ulysses S. Grant by Ronald C. White Jr.
Heck yeah. All right, last one. Do you know what mine is, if you had to guess?
Ooh. I feel like I should. I should, shouldn't I?
You should. Maybe not this specific book, but...
I just can't decide if it's the first one, Twilight, or if it's Breaking Dawn.
It's actually, dang it.
What's that V. Schwab book, ain't it?
Dude, wouldn't that be hilarious? That'd be classic. I don't know why I didn't think
dude,
about
what
it.
is it? We've already talked about Dune. Shoot, dude, what is it? We've already done Wheel of Time. We've already done Game of Thrones. Oh, is it Jade?
Yeah, dude. It's the Greenbone Saga.
Okay.
So Jade Legacy is the last book. Man, and again, this is one of the first like trilogies I really read when I first got back. And I just saw like someone recommend it on just some video I read, and I was like, I went to the Barnes & Noble and saw the first one, read it. I mean, and it just so happened like when I read the first book, the third book was like about to come out. So I quickly read the first, second, and then the third one came out like right when I finished the second one. So like I immediately bought the third book like right when it came out and finished it like 2 days later. I mean, this series is so good and just not talked about. I mean, obviously it's my number one. In the last book, it's got a 4.66 rating, 17,000 ratings, so not as many. To give you just the context of the first book First book has 4.11 rating out of 5, 50,000 ratings almost. And I'll just read the little synopsis here just so I don't butcher like what this is about from Jade City. So it says the Call family is one of 2 crime syndicates that control the island of Kekon. It's the only place in the world that produces rare magical jade, which grants those the right of training and heritage superhuman abilities. Yikes, I just butchered that. The Greenbone clans of honorable jade-wearing warriors once protected the island from foreign invasion, but nowadays in a bustling port war metropolis full of fast cars and foreign money, Greenbone families like the Calls are primarily involved in commerce, construction, and everyday upkeep of the districts of their protection. When the simmering tensions between the Calls and their greatest rival erupts into open violence in the streets, the outcome of this clan war will determine the fate of all Greenbones and the future of Kekon itself. So I feel like that like just doesn't know justice. Basically, this right here is an urban fantasy, so I would say it's light fantasy. Very light fantasy. It is The Godfather combined with an Asian-inspired and like Asian setting fantasy. So it's like 1980s vibes in a fictitious Asian country with 2 crime families that are just going at each other. And I cried so many times in this series. So many.
Really?
Probably at least 3 times. I remember
like tears
bawling.
down the face.
Oh,
Ooh,
dude, I remember bawling at one
it.
point. She just does such a good job of really getting you to buy into this family, and you know how they have to either stick together or break up. I mean, it's the ebb and flow of this family. That's one of the main crime families in this island. Just going at it with this other one, and just the ebbs and flows of that, and man, it's just so good. I can't tell you how good this series is.
And you've been talking about it for a while. I mean,
yeah.
when did you read the first book? Was it 2020? A few years ago, right? Maybe not that long.
Yeah, I mean, it was 2020 for sure.
I mean, I remember you first reading this book and telling me like, dude. And I remember I don't know what it is. I saw the cover and I was like,
it doesn't look cool. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Cool. That's such a stupid thing to say, but it doesn't.
And even just reading that, I'm like, that doesn't really sound good at all. And I can't even remember why I read it. I think I just bought into someone. But dude, it is so good. Like I mean, it's my number one. Like I mean, all I'm saying is it's Godfather combined with fantasy in a like Asian inspired world. So again, it's not hard fantasy. Like they have cars and phones and that sort of thing. So, but it seems like the 80s or 90s type of setting, but it's not on Earth. It's a different world, but they have the same like rules as Earth does. Just there's a little bit of light magic with Jade, which is just like
what kind of rules? Like you can't say that F word.
What?
Like, you said
light
the same
rules? Yeah, no, they can't. They die immediately. No, they say the F word. I'm confident in this book, but anyway.
Sorry.
It's just good. It's just so good. I can't say more about it, and it's just sad that I think it's started to get more and more like talk about it now. But I mean, dude, I just don't know anyone. I've never met another person that's read this book.
Well, I was just about to say. I mean, off air, we were talking about which fictional thing I should read next. Is this what you think is the next thing I should read? Is this
if you read this, I mean, it's just I don't know. You know, if we're talking about views, probably not. But I mean, it's so good, and I can't wait to read it again. This is like a book. Once we like get into a good place, like I would love to read this series every year.
And I mean, if we're
like
talking
that's
about
the kind of
views,
series it is.
I mean, my top 10, every one of them had like 9,000.
True.
or several of them.
True.
So I'm getting views.
If you wanted to, we could. Because again, like I said, it really is that. To me, it's that good.
And when did
I
you finish it?
I almost don't want other people to read it because it's just like, what if they don't?
It's
think
like your
as
own
good?
thing.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't know. I finished it I think I actually read it in 2019, and then 2020. The second or the last one came out, and so I mean, I finished it shortly after that. So I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, but I mean, God, it was just.
Yeah.
Some of the twists are just insane.
Yeah.
But it's like a crime suspense, but in a light fantasy world. Anyway, but great books. So I know we had some diversity amongst the two of us with you having a lot of nonfiction. I had some nonfiction.
Yeah,
you
did.
had some fantasy. So I guess it probably gives someone a good full picture though of if they're wanting to get some different genres. I mean, we have no romance.
Yeah.
No, like, I think
No
my only
YA.
like normal fiction is what even make it actually? It's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo
Mm-hmm.
is the only non-fantasy fiction book I have.
Yeah.
I almost put a Stephen King book on here. I almost put The Shining on as an honorable mention. I think it's a good book, but it just doesn't make the cut for me personally. I know for a lot of people it's like up there. But
I'm so shocked neither one of us put The Count of Monte Cristo that we read together.
that was a
while
great
back.
book, dude.
Great
but
book.
wow,
Thick.
thick. The unabridged version, which we read, tough.
Mm-hmm. I remember
Very
us.
tough.
I remember we talked about it. We were like, dude, we're obviously reading the unabridged version. I got about 300 pages in, and I was like,
Why did we do
why did we do this?
Dude,
And
why
I
did we
never
do that?
found the quote, dude, that I remember loving so much when I read it in high school. I never came across it, so I guess in high school I just had a
You made
easier
that
mind
up.
to impress. I don't know.
You read the unabridged version for sure in high school, so
Yeah.
maybe it's not even in the unabridged version. The irony, they took it out in the unabridged. It's like, wait, that's not what
That
word
line's kind of
means.
stupid. We're taking it out. Okay, that's our top 10. I do think it gives a very good picture of like what you're kind of going to get from this for the most part. Like, I'm very heavy nonfiction, history. You're very more so. I shouldn't even say. We both dabble in both things, but I think
Yeah.
I do more nonfiction.
We're
You
just
do more
reverse,
fantasy.
yeah.
But yeah, that's where we stand in July of 2023. It is subject to change. I'm sure it will. I've got some books that I'm pretty hyped about that are coming up down the line. I think that's it. I think we're at like an hour and a half right
You think
now.
so?
Well, I just looked at the phone when I got up and it was an hour 20.
Oh,
So if you're still here, wow, bless you.
wow. We do have a lot coming. We'll do some in-depth stuff on the Stormlight,
Dune.
Dune, and then tell us what we should read next. Should we read Red Rising next or Mistborn?
Or should we finish the Three Body Problem series?
Please don't vote for that. Oh, God.
I've got also coming down the line nonfic. I'm probably going to read this Thomas Jefferson one by John Meacham, who's an amazing author. I don't really know what beyond that. I might read that Revolutionary Russia you have by Orlando Figes.
Great
After
book.
that,
Great book. That
anyway.
that should have made honorable mention. Honestly, great book though. I already had a Russian history, so it's fine.
Yeah, there's so many books that I wanted to have on this list. I wish I could have done like a top 50.
Put your top 10 too. If there's a book,
Yes.
especially if it's your like top 3 that we didn't even mention,
Yeah.
you
And let
definitely
us know
drop
if some of our top 10s are in your top 10. I'd love to hear if somebody has American Ulysses in their top 10.
it. I'd love to hear if someone has Green Bone Saga.
Mm.
What if someone has 1 and 2? What if their
Did-
1 is American Ulysses and 2
I
Green
think
Bone?
the YouTuber, the Daniel guy, has this series in his top something. I feel like
What,
I saw it on
Greenbone?
one of his tier lists. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I
Daniel
heard
Green.
about it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He did like a tier list video like in 2020 of the books he was currently reading, and he put it up there, and it was like a S tier. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, okay.
I gotta get that.
And I just happened to be at Barney's and Nobody's.
We also got some other Sanderson stuff to read. I really want to read Tress and Elantris and get those knocked out. I've read a lot of Star Wars in my day. And honestly, the best one is the novelization of The Revenge of the Sith. So,
Wow. And guys, that's going to be it. Because Jesse's mic or Robert Downey Jr.'s mic just went out. But this is episode God knows what and our top 10 list. Tune in whenever we post another video on whatever we post next. Thanks for watching.